let's open this up to our panelists joining us live. We have Ashok Sajanar, former diplomat, with us. Sushant Sareen, a senior fellow of ORF. We also have Dr. Jeffrey Gunter, former U.S. ambassador. Alexander Slater is former managing director of the USIBC. We have Richard Painter, law professor at the University of Minnesota and former chief White House ethics lawyer for President George W. Bush. Let's quickly begin with you, Dr. Jeffrey Gunter. The question is this, that there couldn't have been a bigger setback for President Trump than we've seen coming from the Supreme Court, because his entire foreign policy and much that he's done has hinged around the tariffs. And now that they've been struck down by the Supreme Court, leaving very, very little room for maneuver, as in fact Dr. Jeffrey Sachs was telling us, what can we expect from here on?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think it just shows the greatness of our American system, that the Supreme Court weighs in. It's obviously not what we want to see. It's obviously, though, a very narrow decision based on those tariffs that were imposed by the International Emergency Economic Protection Act. And trust me, Donald Trump is a fighter. He always fights for American people. He fights for America first, and he is fully prepared to try to continue those policies. So, we'll see how it plays out. And I would take a little bit of exception with President Trump trying to subvert the Supreme Court. It's not what he's doing at all. What he's doing is actually advancing the American people, advancing the American economy, and putting America first, and using all the powers that the U.S. president has.
Okay, let me, before I come across to other panelists, in fact, my colleague Siddharth Talia has a copy of that Supreme Court order. Siddharth, what's very interesting is that of the 6-3 verdict, 2 of the judges who ruled against the tariffs were actually those who were appointed by Trump. Had they voted for Trump, he would have won 5-4, but that actually didn't happen.
That did not happen. In fact, let me take you through the operative portion here, Madhav, of that all-important Supreme Court judgment. 6-3, the majority judgment in favor of invalidating the decisions taken by Donald Trump by invoking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Here's what the operative portion says, and I'm going to quote it now from the judgment itself. The President asserts the extraordinary power to unilaterally impose tariffs of unlimited amount, duration, and scope. In light of the breadth, history, and constitutional context of that asserted authority, he must identify clear congressional authorization to exercise it. IEEPA's grant of authorities to regulate importation falls short. IEEPA contains no reference to tariffs or duties. The government points to no statute in which the Congress used the word regulate to authorize taxation, and until now no precedent has read the IEEPA to confer such power. We claim no special competence in matters of economics or foreign affairs. We claim only, as we must, the limited role assigned to us by Article 3 of the Constitution. Fulfilling that role, we hold, and this is important, we hold that the IEEPA does not authorize the President to impose tariffs. So therefore, all of his decisions, as a result of having invoked that particular act to impose tariffs on multiple countries, including India, Madhav, stands invalidated by the court today. Absolutely.
And in fact, some very, very pressing words or important words that have come in from that particular judgment. But let me quickly get in a quick round of reactions from all of our panelists. Alexander Slater, the big question is this, and what the message that Supreme Court has given out is very clear, that, legislating may be very difficult, that it may be complicated to try and pass a law when it comes to tariffs. But that's just how the U.S. Constitution has envisaged it. President Donald Trump has clearly tried to operate outside of the constitutional mandate.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, it's clear that the court is saying here, or at least the majority decision is saying, that the statute, as passed by Congress, does not authorize the imposition of taxes for the president in this broad manner. And so that really is the long and the short of it in terms of the decision's statement about authority. But the decision doesn't say anything about what comes next. In terms of its affirmation of the circuit court's decision, that means that the circuit court itself kicked the decision back to the Court of International Trade to figure out what remedies need to be arise if indeed it was found that the president didn't have the authority to impose these tariffs. And so this case is going to continue as the Court of International Trade figures out what comes next. As a policy matter, the president does maintain other authorities to impose tariffs. tariffs on aluminum and steel, for example, and tariffs on pharmaceuticals arising from a 232 investigation that remains ongoing could be forthcoming. And so you're just going to have to wait and see, as a policy matter, how the president reacts to this using the other authorities available to him. At the same time, it does suggest that whatever tariffs he does impose under those sort of judicially affirmed authorities will be narrower than what he has been using to date.
Right. Let me quickly bring in Ambassador Ashok Sajanar also on that. The question, Mr. Sajanar, is this: that Donald Trump tried something which perhaps no country has, at least to this effect, using tariffs as a tool of diplomacy in terms of trying to get whatever the country wants and securing its interest in different sorts of ways. Now, that clearly is not something that's going to work out from now. How are we looking at all of this panning out? For countries like India, which just recently arrived into an agreement, that agreement clearly does not mean much now. But what are we looking at? How things will pan out from here on? Are there likely to be any other tricks that President Trump can now try?
Yeah, thank you very much, Madhav, for having me. Tariffs definitely cannot be used as diplomacy. I think they are the antithesis of each other. Tariff has been used as a weapon, and it's a very blunt weapon. It's a blunt weapon that has been used against many countries, including India. And now that blunt weapon has been taken away from Donald Trump by the Supreme Court. But I remember, when the first time the Supreme Court it was expected that the Supreme Court is going to come out with its judgment on these tariffs. At that time, it was mentioned that the administration, was prepared for it, and they really had a plan B. So they have a number of other sections of the U.S. Constitution, of the U.S. statute book. One of them was mentioned just now, 232, as the emergency power. I remember when I used to be in Washington, there used to be all the talk of 301 and 201 sections against intellectual property rights. But I think the scope of those is limited, in my view. I'm not an expert, so I cannot really speak with such great authority, but I have dealt with these matters when I was handling the international trade negotiations in Geneva under the WTO, and there were all these threats from the United States of imposing sanctions on India under Section 301. But those are limited, those authorities are limited. It is not such an omnibus, such a comprehensive sort of a sanction across all items, all products that are coming into the country, into the United States from any other country. That having been said, I think the U.S. administration, Mr. Trump, he is, in my view, not going to give up. He's going to sort of, push back. I think there are reports also to suggest that they are going to ask for a review of this decision. They are going to appeal against the decision. So let's wait and see what happens on that. I think the whole world will, because it's not only India is affected, of course, but the whole world is affected by this. There are a large number of countries against whom these tariffs, illegal tariffs, have been imposed. So we really need to see what Mr. Trump and his team, they sort of, try to deal with it. I think one aspect, if I could mention, because that has been increasingly mentioned, that is focus on something else so that the attention of the people can be taken away from the Epstein files. And I think that is going to be something.
I'm going to come to all those points. I just want to go through the tariffs points first, narrative correction, headline management, all of that we'll come to in just a minute. But I want to bring in Richard Painter on a very interesting report that I'm just seeing. And this came about 23 hours ago. Richard Painter, we're about, I think, roughly 2 quarters into the entire tariff since they were first imposed. And what's very interesting is that U.S. imports continue to outpace its exports last year. And it's gone up actually by about 2% compared to 2025, hitting $1.2 trillion. So these tariffs weren't actually delivering what they were supposed to do. Despite the fact that, trade with China is down, they were actually backfiring as far as the U.S. economy is concerned. Richard Painter, can you hear me? I think we lost that line there with Richard Painter. But Sushant would like to take that question because, it ultimately seems that this has all been backfiring. And the big implications, internationally speaking, particularly when it comes to Russia, Ukraine and other theaters where, these tariffs, President Trump had at least envisaged would help him achieve a peace deal. Now, that's clearly not on the table.
Yeah. So, look, at the end of the day, this is a political tool and a diplomatic tool. He's using it as one, and he seems to be convinced that it works, which is why he keeps boasting about it. So there is nothing you can say or do to convince him otherwise. Secondly, I don't think we should ever underestimate the ability of governments to ensure that there are other tools in the arsenal. So I don't think this tariff drama is over. But the bigger concern, Madhav, is that the US market or the US economy is one which in some ways drives an international economy. It is the most sought after market and all of that. And if you have this kind of capriciousness, this kind of confusion in the US system, that there is no certainty, there is complete disruption. If you're a businessman today, if you are an importer or an exporter, how are you going to do business today? Because you don't know what tariffs you're talking about. You have a shipment coming tomorrow or a week from now. There is no clarity on what's going to happen, how things are going to play out. And this smacks of third worldism. I'm sorry to say this, it sounds very politically incorrect, but this is exactly what it sounds. So purely if you look at this decision today, not that when Trump was, very capriciously imposing tariffs, one day he didn't like somebody's comment, threatened 200% tariff. The other day he liked somebody, he said, okay, fine, I'll give you a special rate. American presidents are not supposed to behave like this. It's a very serious job.
Absolutely.
Probably the most important in some ways. So the problem is going to be that one, this whole confusion which has been created. Secondly, I think what will happen, of course, I don't think this tariff drama is over. This court case and all will go on. But I think all the other tools that are currently available to Trump I don't think there's any limit to them or how much sanction or how much tariffs he can impose. But there are many sections which will require some kind of a finding before he can act. Now, you can probably generate a finding with AI tools in a matter of 24 hours and impose those tariffs. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility these days. But it will end the kind of capriciousness with which tariffs were being imposed.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I think we have to try and figure this out, because even from an Indian perspective, there's a lot of confusion today.
Absolutely.
If I have to quote something, I don't know what is the tariff today.
Absolutely. And let me bring in Richard Painter on that. Richard Painter, the question is this. The question is that, A, there is so much of confusion when it comes to international trade. There's a certain amount of planning, amount of procedure that's involved. Now, there's so much that's changed over the past 1 year, and we don't know how much more will change, because already we've seen White House officials say that they're going to use other tools to try and press further tariffs. What can we expect from here on? Because there are countries like China, Brazil, which have held out, which are probably laughing today.
Well, let's put it this way.
Richard Painter, please.
I think the problem we have is that it's very clear that tariffs, broad sweeping tariffs of this sort, are a disastrous economic policy. We tried this in 1930 with the Smoot-Hawley tariff bill that actually passed Congress, and we started a worldwide trade war that precipitated a Great Depression and eventually a real war. And I think the only reason the economy is held up is that the stock market has anticipated that Donald Trump would probably lose this case and the Supreme Court would rein him in. But this is a very dangerous policy to be imposing tariffs in this haphazard fashion. And I should emphasize that it's clearly unconstitutional. A tariff is a tax. And going back to the founding of this country, we made it very clear that we would not tolerate taxation without representation. That's what the British were doing to us with the East India Company. The East India Company was also, of course, wreaking havoc in India itself. But they would try to import tea into the United States with tariffs, imposing tariffs on all other tea, and force us to drink that East India Company tea. Well, the Bostonians tossed the tea into Boston Harbor. We had a revolution over that. Our Constitution makes it very clear that Congress has the taxing power. The president doesn't just impose a tax. A tariff is a tax. Indeed, it was the only form of taxation, the principal form of taxation we had in this country up until 1913 or so, when we had the income tax pursuant to a constitutional amendment.
No, but the big question is, that it was all happening without the legal mandate of the legislature. And that's why things became extremely problematic. And Jeffrey Gunter, what are the tools that can now be used? Because very clearly, without the House's help, without the House's support, President Trump will not be able to go ahead and impose these tariffs. Or do you think he has more powers wherein he'll be able to reinstate some of those tariffs at least?
Let me just touch on a few things with deep respect for my fellow panelists who I've been on a lot with. Number one, there's many other statutes and opportunities for President Trump to enforce his foreign policy. This is not taxing individual Americans. This is taxing foreign countries. And there's a great distinction there, as President Trump is the commander-in-chief and the person responsible for protecting Americans and responsible for our foreign policy. So I would gently push back. I'm not a law professor in Minnesota, but I could certainly tell you the economy is going incredibly well and improved from the Joe Biden days, where we had 7% inflation. The big sucking sound that we were hearing were manufacturing jobs leaving the United States, going to foreign countries. So I deeply and strongly push back on the notion that Americans are not better off with tariffs.
But your imports have actually gone up. The gap has widened by 2.1%. Jeffrey Gunter, compared to 2024, you've hit $1.2 trillion. That's what the official figures show. And this is a report from 24 hours ago that I'm reading from.
Listen, democracy is not always clean and perfect. If you want something that really looks like a third world country, go look at the various dictatorships that we see around the world, and you'll get clear policy, which is terrible policy, which benefits the dictators and not the people themselves. So that's my second pushback on our esteemed panelists. Listen, this is democracy at work. President Trump has many other opportunities in his arsenal to put forth the American first policy. And like I've said time and time again to our panelists, we continue to have a great relationship with India. Businesses and trade between our two countries will continue to flourish, and we will see Modi and President Trump on the stage together with 100,000 yelling and happy Americans and Indians at the great relationship. And the economy is strong. It's going well. Our inflation is down. Our borders are sealed. And this is because of President Trump's greatness. And we will continue to see that.
Well, Trump claims that he has a backup plan. This is the latest coming in from some of the agencies. In fact, Trump saying that he has a backup plan. What could that backup plan be, Sushant Sareen? Is this just bluster and bravado, or is there actually a backup plan?
No, I'm sure he must be. Look, Madhav, we have to recognize, governments have a lot of backup plans. All governments around the world. That if one particular path is blocked, they will pick something else. So, for example, you make a law which is to deal with terrorism, but then you catch hold of some other criminal and you want to book him under a very draconian law. You impose the terrorism law on that and you manufacture some charge. So governments have ways and means of doing things. And similarly, I think there are enough tools in the US government arsenal. We should never underestimate the power of the executive to figure out ways and means of doing what it has already decided to do. For example, Putin never calls his war on Ukraine a war. He says it's a special military operation. Now, going after what has happened today, the US Supreme Court can say that Trump cannot declare war, but can Trump ask US armed forces to do a special military operation?
That's the question. That's the question. Certainly, let me put that question.
In his arsenal, which he can use.
Yeah.
The question is which one he use and whether he can use those tools, because there is a certain procedure to some of these other, as Ambassador Sajjanar was counting out, Special 301, I remember that. There are a number of other such acts. There are certain procedures laid out. Now, those procedures to some extent will tie the hands of the president if he wants to impose a sanction or a tariff at any particular point of time. He will probably have to go through that process. That takes time. Trump is very impatient. He doesn't want to use that time. He just wants to issue executive orders like old emperors used to do. And to that extent, his hand is going to be restrained. And that is going to be a problem. But can he do it? Of course he can. And maybe AI will become a good help for him. You can manufacture a case against any country in the world.
Will he actually do that? We don't know. But, Alexander Slater, I want to take you back to what happened just about 24 hours ago. We saw the Epstein files blow up once again. And then we saw, some kind of many saw it as a narrative correction where Trump said, I'll release all this information related to UFOs, aliens, so on and so forth. Now with this huge setback, are we looking at the US potentially trying to divert attention with an attack on Iran? Because that's also been discussed for quite some time now, in the public domain. Alexander Slater.
I would hope that that would not be the case. I think that the deployment of the use of force and military action is something that every president would not weigh lightly, would not use as a way to divert attention from problems at home. In terms of the U.S. and Iran, I think those two countries have, for a long time and predating the Trump administration, had an ongoing tussle over Iran's nuclear weapon program, and as well Iran's aggressive tactics to suppress its own population, which of course we saw earlier some months ago, that resulted in the estimated deaths of 30,000 people. True terrible outcomes, and something that no state should ever do. And so, this is a question that I hope the president does not use to divert attention, but uses force if he does pursue this, that it's done in a way that is appropriate for the situation and doesn't result in additional disorder. Because what we need right now is a calmer global situation, not one that is more upset.
All right. Ashok Sajjanar, you were talking about the entire possibility of, setting the narrative correct, of the type of headline management that we've seen, perhaps over the last 24 hours, and even in the past, that President Trump is often, fond of or perhaps likes to do in crisis situations. What is your guess on what will be the next big step?
No, I think definitely as far as attention on these tariffs is concerned, that is, there'll be something else that will be put in the place of these IEEPA tariffs. I think that I'm very clear about, because even earlier, as I said, they had the US administration had said that they had a plan B, and if these are going to be struck down, and they had an inkling that they could be struck down because, one of the lower courts had also said that. And even in the past also, when one president had tried to use that authority, that was also struck down by the courts. But here maybe Mr. Trump trusted that, he had appointed, 3 or 4 of the Supreme Court judges, so they might rule in his favor. But the Supreme Court in the United States has redeemed itself by giving this judgment. So I'm sure that this is definitely going to come through. And I think it'll be ratcheted up, as far as the pressure on Iran is concerned. I will not go to the extent of saying that, he is going to attack, because, if the attack were to take place, there is going to be, as far as energy prices are concerned, there is going to be, huge turmoil. And all the countries in the Middle East have told Mr. Trump that they will not allow their own territory, they will not allow their water space, they will not allow their airspace to be used against Iran. So, all these countries, whether it is Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, etc., and these, the forces, the soldiers, the troops that the United States has stationed in these countries, because it has large bases there, they could also come under attack. Israel itself could come under huge attack of ballistic missiles. So it could become something that becomes quite difficult to control. So both in terms of stability, peace, as also in terms of the economy, the rising prices of oil. We have seen that oil prices have already started going up after this Gerald Ford has been brought in from the Caribbean into the Middle Eastern waters.
So it'll be interesting to see all of that pans out. Jeffrey Gunter, one interesting thing that the Supreme Court has not spoken about is about whether there will have to be some amount that has to be paid back. Because so far all the Supreme Court has said that the current decisions and whatever has been imposed in terms of the tariffs, that's not going to fly. They've made that extremely clear. But what's not clear is that whether the US will actually have to pay back some of those tariffs.
Very well said, and it will remain unclear for a while. This will be litigated, and there's going to be various, it's not going to be a quick process. So it's a great question, and I agree. It's something that's going to remain unclear for a while. With respect to Iran, you know, let's be honest. I have my security clearance, the highest in the country. We really do not know what's going on between the U.S. government and various other countries in the region. So I respectfully push back under the assumption that whether it's the Saudis or any other countries in the area, that they are against any type of military action against Iran. I would actually say we just don't know because we do not know the discussions. And as you well know, President Trump is not going to telegraph anything. And again, if you don't believe me, go ask Maduro and see what he thinks of President Trump, whether he telegraphs anything or not.
Is that really going to be the way in which we'll gauge what the international response is? What President Maduro says, Sushant Sareen?
No, what I'm saying
No, I don't think it's about Maduro, but I think the larger point which is being made, I kind of tend to agree with it. Look, just because some Arab states have issued some statements and said that we will not allow the United States to use our territory, does not mean that's the way it's going to play out. You know, you say one thing in public for public consumption to tell Iran that, look, we have nothing against you. And on the side, you wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and you say, you know, you might as well go ahead and attack these guys and finish off the Islamic regime out there because it is a long-term threat. It's in their case, it's a sectarian threat. It's a civilizational clash also. So there are a number of things which get mixed up. Now, we don't know. Perhaps the other Arab states are being actually genuinely sincere about not attacking Iran, or they're doing some virtue signaling. We'll have to wait and see. Secondly, does Iran have the capability? Well, in the last engagement, they did show that they have a significant ballistic missile capability, but is the United States prepared to handle it? Does it have a fix on where all those missile launchers are going to be, whether it can jam those? We don't know. There are many things about the US military capabilities that we are not aware of, and it's entirely possible that maybe it is military hubris which pushes the United States into a conflict, which then becomes unmanageable, which we have seen in the past.
Right.
So war is a very uncertain thing. It's a very cruel thing. It's a very ugly thing. And the fact of the matter remains that the best of calculations can go wrong, whether of the United States, of Israel, or any of the other countries.
Yeah.
Ideally, there should not be war. Ideally, this matter should be sorted out diplomatically. But I think given the kind of positions that all sides are taking, it'll be something of a miracle if there is no war. Because when you look at the kind of build-up that the Americans have done in the region, then all signs are that it's heading towards a conflict, unless Iran gives in. But if Iran gives in, then regime survival becomes very difficult, and regimes very often are loath to doing anything which puts their survival at stake.
Right. Alexander Slater, I want you to bring you in on one other point. The Dow Jones, S&P 500, NASDAQ have all risen after the Supreme Court has struck down the Trump tariffs. So all those who are, cheering on for these tariffs, clearly there are a large section of those within the industry, within business, who don't think that tariffs are actually helping the United States and at least doing business in the United States is concerned.
I think that there has been, over the last few months, more data that has come out that has shown that, unfortunately, Americans, U.S. businesses are raising prices as a result of these tariffs, and that Americans themselves are paying these tariffs. And when it comes to the imposition of a tax, this is not to say that taxation is bad or good one way or the other, but I think standard economics suggests that when you raise the prices of things, either through taxation or because you're just raising the prices of business, it's going to depress consumption. And the United States' economy is mostly consumption driven. And so to the extent that this results in lower prices or helps arrest inflation, there's this idea that it would be good for businesses because demand would be able to purchase more.
Right.
And Americans would have more disposable income. And I think that's to the extent that you see that in the stock market today, multiple factors drive the market. That's what's at play here.
Jeffrey Gunter, you should answer that question because you've been insisting that tariffs are super good for the American economy. Unfortunately, none of the major stock indices seem to think so.
Look, we all know that what the stock market does on one day is not a barometer or indicator of necessarily what even went on, 10 minutes ago. So I think you have to look at the overall economy and look at the fact that Donald Trump is talking about giving all Americans a $2,000 tax credit. And that should be a great indicator of how tariffs are for the American economy. I just remember the terrible days of Joe Biden where we had 7% inflation, wide open borders, a sucking sound of manufacturing leaving America's country, and 8 conflicts going on, which would never have happened with President Trump.
But how will you do all that without the tariffs coming in, the revenue from the tariffs coming in?
Well, the tariff money is huge, in the words of my former boss and great friend. The revenue that America is making from the tariffs is huge. Wages are going up. Manufacturing is improving. Companies are bringing their manufacturing and their workers' jobs back into America.
But that's all a thing of the past, isn't it now? That's all gone away.
No, it's not.
Into thin air.
I would gently push back on you and my esteemed panelists. It is not of the past. This was a very narrow SCOTUS decision looking at this particular tariffs. I think even the initial, when I started reading the result, it was basically having to do with Mexico and Canada and President Trump's response to it. But granted, it does affect India in the term of steel and other tariffs. But look, tariffs has been around for centuries. India, I think, was number 2 in the world for tariffs and protecting their essential agricultural products, which I do understand and I do respect. It's an important part of India's society and their economy. So look, this is playing out in real time. Can't wait to watch it. But at the end of the day, America loves India, India loves America, and it's all going to work itself out quite well because we have shared values and we're shared democracies.
Well, there's no loss of love, at least at the moment. I don't see any reason for that with the courts tracking down the tariffs. But Ashok Sajanar, this kind of optimism, I don't think even people in the US administration have. Because at the moment, there appear to be a lot of concerned faces. And there's breaking news coming out. Let me just quickly read this out. I don't know if you have this news out yet on the screen. President Trump is going to hold a press briefing on the Supreme Court's tariff decision at 12:45 p.m. EST. That is just about a little over half an hour from now. Trump will be addressing the media. That's something that we'll have to track very closely as well. But we're almost out of time on this bulletin. Quick closing comments from you, Ashok Sajanar.
No, basically, I think whatever Mr. Trump might be able to do, get some other provisions of the U.S. statute book. But there is a huge loss of face as far as Trump is concerned. There's a huge loss of, his standing, both within the United States and in the world, that, he has been abusing power. I think the whole world has known about it. And they've been waiting for the Supreme Court to come out with this ruling, with this verdict. And I think the world will heave a sigh of relief that this judgment has come from the Supreme Court today.
All right. We'll have to leave it there. I'd like to thank all our panelists for joining us. Ashok Sajanar, Sushant Sareen, Dr. Jeffrey Gunter, Alex Slater and Richard Painter. Thanks so much for joining us. Massive move as far as the suspense over tariffs is concerned. The US Supreme Court has struck it down. What will President Trump's next move be? The whole world is watching with bated breath. Thanks so much for joining us this evening.